Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. In our previous lessons, we were discussing different types of pronouns. Today we are going to speak about relative pronouns. If you haven't seen any of the previous videos on pronouns in English, you can follow the links in the description to this video. If you haven't seen the previous video, which might be of interest for our today's topic, please follow the link to it too. It is called the interrogative pronouns in English. To be able to watch my videos on time, subscribe to this channel and let's start. If you have watched the previous video where I spoke about interrogative pronouns, you already know that such words as who, which, what, whom are interrogative pronouns. Today we are going to speak about relative pronouns, which are very similar to those ones. Actually, relative pronouns are whom, whose, what, that, whom, and as. So they also look like question words, like those words that you can find at the beginning of a special question. But they do not start questions. They introduce subordinate clauses. Let's see what I mean. Relative pronouns are who, whose, whom, which, that, and also as. These pronouns introduce attributive, also called relative, clauses. What are these clauses? These are clauses that help us describe the subject or the object of the sentence. These pronouns point back to a noun or to a pronoun that was mentioned before. And this is why we call them relative. They are related to those nouns and pronouns that were mentioned at the beginning of our utterance, and they depend on them. Let's see. The kid liked the bicycle that he saw in that shop yesterday. What is that related to? It is related to the bicycle. The kid liked that bicycle that he saw, right? I know a guy whose father is a sea captain. Whose points back to a guy whose father. Alexander the Great was the man who conquered the known world. Who is related to the noun man? I met my first school teacher yesterday, which was a pleasant surprise. In this sentence you see a comma. My question is, what word which refers to? Actually, which does not point back to any particular word of the sentence. It points back to the whole clause. I met my first school teacher yesterday, and this thing, this encounter, was a pleasant surprise. When which points back to a whole clause, a whole idea, it is separated by a comma, like in this sentence. Now let's look at this table. Relative pronouns can be in subject, in object, and in possessive case. The subject relative pronouns are who, which, and that. The object relative pronouns are whom or who, which, and that. And the possessive relative pronouns, or the relative pronouns in the possessive case, are whose and whose. There is no separate option for things. How do we choose between who and whose? We use who when we want to speak about human beings or animals. So this is a relative pronoun that replaces a noun that is an animal or a person. Whose is used in reference to human beings, animals, and things. As I have already mentioned, we don't have a special word, a special pronoun to point back to things. So when the relative pronoun in the subject or in the object case is that, we don't have any special form in the possessive case. That's why we say whose. Let's look at some examples. James was the first person in the group who spoke to me. Who points back to person, the first person. Mary Anderson was the woman who invented the first functional windscreen wiper. Again, who points back to a person, to a living being, Mary Anderson. The vacuum cleaner scared our cat Guinness, who was sleeping on the couch. Who is used in reference to the cat, Guinness. The first president of the company, whose picture you can see on this wall, was an outstanding man. Whose points back to the president of the company, that is, to a human being. And in this last example, this bay was featured in the movie, whose name I can't remember, whose points back to the movie. The movie is not a living thing, though whose is used because we don't have any separate pronoun for this case. I also want to pay additional attention to the example about the cat. You remember in one of our lessons we discussed that we can use the pronouns he or she when we speak about our dog or our cat or any other favorite pet of ours. We won't say that about some stray dog, or about some animal in the jungles, but we can say that about an animal that we consider to be our family member, right? And the same applies to whom or whose. As we refer to them as he or she, we can use whose or whom. This is just an explanation because actually you don't have any alternatives, as was already said, because there is only one possessive form, whose. Relative pronouns not only point back to a person or thing that was mentioned before, but they can also introduce subordinate attributive clauses. And that probably is the most common relative pronoun. Let's look at it now. The relative pronoun that can be used in reference to human beings, animals, and things. For instance, there is something that I need to tell you. Or, they didn't have the candies that you like, so I bought some cupcakes. Isn't the stray dog that we saw a couple of hours ago near the supermarket? I don't know the woman that my sister is talking to. Remember also that is a pronoun that can be omitted, so nothing will happen and the meaning of our sentence won't change if I say there is something I need to tell you, or they didn't have the candies you like. This is what normally happens in speech. In some cases, though, you cannot omit it because the idea of what you're saying will not be clear. Let's see. This is the man that sold me the book. You can also say this is the man who sold me the book. And neither who nor that cannot be omitted in this case, because the sentence will be ruined. Let's try. This is the man sold me the book. It doesn't work. Now, the relative pronoun which is used in reference to things or animals. This is the book which was written by one of my friends. We had lunch downtown, which is always a nice experience. My colleague started speaking in Korean, which surprised me very much, as I didn't know she knew the language. In the first example, which and that can be used interchangeably, but in the second and in the third, only which is used. Remember, which can refer to the whole idea that was mentioned before. This is why you see the comma here. We had lunch downtown, and this thing, having lunch downtown, is always a nice idea. Only which has such power, to refer to the whole clause. But both which and that can introduce attributive clauses. For instance, this is the book which was written by one of my friends, or this is the book that was written by one of my friends. It doesn't matter whether you prefer which or that in such sentences. When we speak about the clauses that are introduced by which and that, we speak about restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. And this is something that I want to talk about in more detail because from my practice, I know it's a challenge for some students. Let's look at the sentences. They don't sell the dessert that your sister likes. That your sister likes is a subordinate clause. It is a restrictive subordinate clause. What does it mean? It means that it restricts us. We do not have the freedom of omitting it. If we drop it, it will be just a half of the sentence and the idea will be ruined. They don't sell the dessert. What dessert? The dessert that your sister likes. They don't sell the dessert which your sister likes is also a restrictive clause in this case, which and that are absolutely interchangeable. They don't sell the dessert your sister likes. The same, we just omitted the pronoun altogether, but the idea is the same. Yeah, your sister likes is a subordinate clause and it is restrictive. It cannot be separated from the whole sentence because the idea of the utterance will be lost. To decide whether to use which or that, you might want to ask yourself, is the clause that which or that introduces essential to the sentence or not? Can I omit it? Will the sentence be ruined if I omit it or not? If you can't omit this clause, if it is essential, you can use that. If you can omit it, you can use which. Let's see. The town has a botanical garden, which is very untypical for such a small town. This clause, which is very untypical for such a small town, is a non-restrictive clause. If you omit it, the main clause will not be harmed in any way. The town has a botanical garden. Okay, our sentence just became shorter, but it's a full, complete sentence. And the subordinate clause, which is very typical for such a small town, is just an additional piece of information. Now, the town has a botanical garden which grows about 400 different species of plants. In this case, that introduces a restrictive clause. This information, which grows about 400 different species of plants, cannot be separated from the sentence, which points back to a particular word in the sentence. And this information is about that word, that noun, yeah? Botanical garden. It is not about the clause in general. It's not an additional piece of information to the main clause, yeah? It is a piece of information that belongs to one of the nouns in this sentence and cannot be separated from it. In non-restrictive clauses, which or who must be used. That cannot be used to introduce these clauses. To separate a non-restrictive clause from the rest of the sentence, commas must be used. This is a must. So, not putting a comma is a violation of the rule, please mind that. Mrs. Bells, who is 70, still goes to yoga classes. Jane's boyfriend took her to Barcelona for the weekend, which was a wonderful surprise. Here we see non-restrictive clauses. They can be omitted and the sense of our sentences will not be damaged. Once again, please note that you cannot use that in such clauses. For instance, you cannot say Mrs. Bells, that is 70, still goes to yoga classes. The sentence makes no sense. Neither can you say Jane's boyfriend took her to Barcelona for the weekend. That was a wonderful surprise. You can say that in a separate sentence, but not like this, not in a subordinate clause. And one more important point, a very logical one, still I have to say it, in non-restrictive clauses, the pronoun cannot be left out. So, Oliver didn't greet the guests, which was very rude of him. You cannot say Oliver didn't greet the guests, was very rude of him. This second option is not correct. Now, another interesting pair of relative pronouns is whose and whom. Whose is used as the possessive form of who, while whom is used as the object of a verb or preposition. Memorizing this rule will make things easier for you. This is the guy whose dog destroyed my jeans. Whose is the possessive form of who. So we kinda want to say the dog of who, right? Whose dog? Michael, whose house we stayed in, was very hospitable. In the house of who? whose house we stayed in. This is how we use whose. Now, the manager whom I spoke to yesterday was rather rude. Whom here replaces the object pronoun. Him or her. The manager, yeah? The manager whom I spoke to. And little Tom, for whom the party was organized, was on cloud 9. It was organized for Tom, for him. We are dealing with the object of the preposition here. The last relative pronoun that we need to mention is as. The relative pronoun as is normally used with the demonstrative pronouns such and same. It may refer to both living beings and things. There is no such thing as perfection. He wore the same shirt and the same tie as he had worn the day we first met. Here, as introduces a relative clause. He had worn the day we first met. But please mind that the use of relative pronoun as is not that common. Mostly we'll hear which or that in such situations. Pay attention to this sentence. This is not the fish as I ordered. Though the sentence is grammatically not quite correct, you might hear people say that. We consider this to be poor English, but still, the pronoun as sometimes, by some speakers, can be used instead of other relative pronouns. Following the grammar, the rules of the English grammar, we should say this is not the fish that I ordered or which I ordered. I sometimes include such examples of poor English into my lessons just to illustrate that such things exist in the language. In reality, people say that, yeah, English is spoken by millions of people, and to many of them it is a native language. So though we should say that this is grammatically incorrect, we cannot say that these people are wrong, because this is the way they use the language. My purpose here, when I introduce such examples, is to make you acquainted with them and to demonstrate you that there is no hidden meaning behind this as, yeah, or if there is some, I tell about it, just for you to know about the existence of such phenomena. This is all for today. I do hope that this lesson was useful and that I managed to answer some of your questions. Please subscribe to this channel not to miss my other lessons, and see you in the next video.